Action is quite clear that renewable energy will be a focus for the nation and also for the state of Andhra Pradesh.
Thank you for that. I'm going to come back to you with a trigger question in the second round, but first let me turn to Dr. Rania. Dr. Rania, you also hold a really interesting portfolio of international cooperation. Given that there are countries like India who are further moving along when it comes to solarization, but then there are other countries who are not. I think your role is, especially being Egypt and being such a strong nation, in terms of changing opinions, shifting opinions, having conversations about energy transition with other countries? And do countries at large have responsibilities to have these conversations?
Well, thank you very much. Since last July, it's been planning, economic development, and international cooperation. So that's a bigger portfolio, and it just shows that in order to leverage on the international partnerships, also how much of the public investments need to be made wisely and more efficiently to crowd in private investment. We know that the energy transition requires a lot of finance. Everybody talks about the just transition, therefore just financing. More concessional finance needs to be available, not just to governments, but also to private sector. And then comes the concept of blending, so that we can de-risk a lot of these projects and help countries move into, or move towards their energy transition. I think if we forget about what happened yesterday and the updates on the US and the Paris agreement, we know that countries have their nationally determined contributions. So the NDCs are sort of objectives for countries, objectives in a multilateral system. They're of course voluntary, they're not obligatory, but we do know that for countries or private sectors who want to invest in countries, they need to be known, the NDCs, countries need to be clear with the projects that they want, and that's the only way that you can secure financing, because everybody wants to be, if you're talking about private banks, if you're talking about the multilateral development banks like the World Bank, IFC, EBRD, EIB, all of these international partners are ready to finance private sector in the energy transition. But for that to be successful, it has to be within a national context, i.e. these private sector projects are actually adding to achieving the NDC, where commitment from the government with respect to its NDCs, but clarity with respect to the projects, and then the credibility that you need to have with the international community to be able to finance at a low cost or a low interest rate, these relatively, of course, is quite important. Something that we did, we hosted COP27, of course, in Sharm el-Sheikh. This was in November 22. And the theme was from pledges to implementation. So we know that countries pledged 100 billion at that time. After COP29, now the number is 300 billion. We haven't seen all the 100, but let's see if we can see a motivation for the 300 billion. But in any event, the point was, there's always a blame on countries. You're not ready with your projects. People don't know how you're going to achieve your energy transition objectives, and that's why financing is not making its way. So during Sharm el-Sheikh, we put together a guidebook. It's called the Sharm el-Sheikh Guidebook for Just Financing. And under the word just financing, we said it's not just the quantity of financing, but the quality, i.e. The feasibility studies, creating the infrastructure among personnel and staff in government and the private ecosystem to be able to always have a pipeline of projects, and therefore you can leverage on the existing financing that happens. So in your initiative, when I read about it, again, it's a way to create that quality finance, i.e. the TA or the capacity building that is required across. I mean, just to conclude, there's so much that we can speak about, but we put together, and you will hear this concept a lot in the G20 and at COP, and it's coming up again, is country platforms. Countries need to put together a country platform for climate action. We created a country platform. It's called the Nexus of Water, Food and Energy, NWFE. In Arabic, Muwafi means fulfilling pledges, so it came from pledges to implementation. And we've been very clear with a set of projects. It's in line with our national 2050 climate strategy. And we say, these are the projects, this is how much we're putting public money, and this is how much we need from the international community, i.e. the IFIs, to finance private sector. And we had debt swap for climate action within the country platform. So you always hear that, and as we go to Brazil, country platforms are becoming very, very, more countries want to do them. We're helping Tanzania and other countries do their own country platform. It has to be country-led. It has to be according to your objectives. You have to be clear about the NDCs. You have to be clear about projects, and it's not only mitigation, but also adaptation is there, because that's also one of the areas of climate action. I can go on for a very long time, but two things to bear in mind. Climate finance exists. It's not too much, but it's up to the country to be clear with its projects. Quality finance means that we need sustainability, and i.e. technical assistance and capacity building in countries. And finally, country platforms do work. So I advise every country to have a country platform and a governance structure for it, so that you can attract whether it's FDI or concessional finance and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's very insightful. Thank you. And since we're on the topic of climate finance, there's been so much discussion around it, and yet when it comes to like the tangibility of what that's translated into on ground, it's been relatively limited. So, being not just public leaders but also elected officials, one of the things that I grapple with is the risk that comes with both committing to jobs as well as mobilizing finance. In the reality of what we see today, especially political leaders, they face that trade-off, is how much do we actually invest in energy transition, how much do we invest in climate change given those risks? How do you navigate that?
I'll talk from the public investment side. Any public money that goes into a project, this project has to be part of whether it's Vision 2030 or a national plan, which is ratified from Parliament. So that's a very important governance and political agency or buy-in, as you mentioned. The second point is, given that fiscal space is quite tight anyways, and we've been facing so many headwinds, not necessarily tailwinds, you want to put, for example, if I'm talking about renewable energy, wind and solar, do you have enough investments in the grid to upload this renewable energy? So the government has to be very clear with its priorities. I'll put investments in the grid, allowing private sector to generate the wind and solar, and this is what's going to create private sector jobs, skilling, greening, and also an entrepreneurial ecosystem sometimes, which does the measurement for the CO2 and so forth. So it's a matter of clarity with the objectives, a very constructive dialogue and understanding when it comes to those who ratify these plans, which is Parliament, which represents people and governorates and so forth. And then finally, what creates the continuous buy-in is that the projects get implemented, so people can see that the energy transition or the climate action is not just a burden on development, but it's part of development. Because each and every energy project, in addition to creating jobs, creates green capacity for more industrialization, for more economic activity. So it's very important to create the overall narrative, and there's so much work that has been written since Glasgow, actually, on the importance of thinking about climate action and development as inseparable. They are not mutually exclusive. It's not either or, and that is something that needs to be continued and pushed. I don't know the issue of yesterday and the announcement of yesterday, how consequential that would be on the multilateral development banks, on the dialogue around climate. Are we going to go back? So it's very strange that today's the first day of Davos, but yesterday this happens. So I think, how far in terms of creating disturbance in the path which look to be moving forward with gains for developing countries, and also better understanding for the multilateral development banks and the global institutions that do provide financing. I don't know. Let's see how that works out. I don't have an answer. All of us have questions.
Nobody does.
Yeah, exactly.
I think from the state perspective, the question that we've been asking is how do you go from mine to energy? We have the entire value chain, the ecosystem. How do you build it out? And how do you create consistency in policies? So if you look at India's view, is how do we bring every bit of our ecosystem? So if you look at rooftop solar to agriculture being solarized, then to the entire green hydrogen, which seems to be the buzzword, and various investments coming into that sector. Green steel. So I think, at least from India's context, is to set the policy straight. Yes, there are some subsidies required, but it's not over and beyond the physical challenges that any state or the federal government would have. That's one part. But the second part again is, how do you make this the transition political resistant, or resistant to politics, right? And that's going. And as a HRD minister, my focus is, how do I create the next set of jobs that we don't even know in exactly which area they're going to come. So working with the industry, working with NGOs, collaborating with them, getting the curriculum, the whole 9 yards, and creating the next wave of jobs, I think is going to be very, very important to make it more resistant.
Thank you so much. I'm being mindful of time, and I'll request one piece, which is this is a conversation. So if you have one question, thought, insight from participants, I know there's folks in the back as well. Would welcome that before we shift on to the next conversation series.
So basically, as we discussed, lots of the focus on mitigation globally as well as in India, and the resources, particularly financial resources allocated for the adaptation, are very less. At the same time, communities are facing lots of challenges because of the climate change, and not only this issue is related to just transition, but